For the first time in our nation's history, the sitting Attorney General, in this case, Pam Bondi, and the U.S. Department of Justice have filed a brief against the government in support of the Second Amendment in front of the Supreme Court. This is absolutely historic, and it is great for our side. We are going to get into all the info behind the case. And if you are a Second Amendment supporter, I urge you to stick around. Before we do that though, if you are new here, please do subscribe so we can continue fighting for your right to keep and bear arms. I really appreciate all the support so far. Okay, so here's what happened, and I need you to pay attention because this is vital. The horrible anti-gun state of Hawaii decided to pass what is known as a vampire rule. This is absolutely evil. Essentially, a vampire rule is a law that prohibits any gun owner from carrying a gun onto private property without express permission from that property owner, like from signage, oral or written consent. It goes without saying, this rule is absolutely insane. And here's the kicker. This didn't just apply to a few locations like sensitive places laws do. No, Hawaii tried to make every piece of private property a gun-free zone by default. That means restaurants, stores, malls, doctor's offices, anything you can think of, those are now gun-free zones. Unless the owner gave you express written permission or put up signage. And let's be real, that's not possible. You and I don't know who owns, let's say, an office building, right? There's not necessarily a person who owns that we can reach out to. But unless the owner gave you express written permission, the state just ignored your right to keep and bear arms and just said that doesn't exist by default. That means millions upon millions of square feet of publicly accessible, publicly used property became gun-free zones overnight. Even for people that have had background checks, went through the entire permitting process, or like in the case of Hawaii, have had firearms training. It doesn't matter, you cannot carry a gun. It's absolutely insane. So of course, the Second Amendment Foundation and a lot of law-abiding citizens came together and said, that's not how the Second Amendment works. Because, of course, it isn't. And that's how this case, Wolfford versus Lopez, was born. So this case worked its way through much of the lower courts, and obviously the traitors down there held up much of the law. But now, it's in front of the Supreme Court. And here is where the bombshell went off. In almost all 2A litigation throughout history, the Department of Justice sides with the anti-gunners. It sides with the government against the 2A people. In fact, and this has been reported by a number of outlets, in a case which has been granted review by the Supreme Court, there has never in U.S. history been an example of the Department of Justice going against the government supporting the Second Amendment plaintiffs. This has never happened before. And that's why it's undeniable that several hours from when I'm recording this, Pam Bondi decided to file this brief. Now, I know a lot of people who are watching this might be thinking, it's a brief. What's the big deal? And honestly, you couldn't be more wrong. Remember, this Wolfford case was only taken because of a Department of Justice brief in the certiorari process, right? That was the only reason it was granted cert was because of a Department of Justice brief. And without even paying attention to this case in particular, the fact that President Trump's Department of Justice is willing to side against the government and support our Second Amendment rights is a slam dunk home run for our side. It is undeniable. The language in the brief itself was super strong. They made no bones about it. They said it was blatantly unconstitutional and that Hawaii was just trying to get around Bruen. And by the way, that's absolutely correct. This is a state that granted 4 gun licenses in the 18 years prior to Bruen. This is a wildly anti-gun state, and Pam Bondi and the Supreme Court are doing something about it. There is, though, the elephant in the room. You've probably already commented it, and I do need to talk about it. I hope you understand where I'm coming from, and I know this is important. The reality is, and I'm sure many of you have already reminded me about this in the comments below, that Pam Bondi has a bad track record on the Second Amendment. That's undeniable. As Attorney General of Florida, she supported red flag laws, which deprive someone of their fundamental constitutional rights without due process, right? Red flag laws, basically, if someone accuses you of something, the police come and take your guns immediately without you being able to defend yourself. It's insane. She supported 18 to 20-year-old carry bans. She supported handgun bans. She supported certain sensitive places restrictions, right? She has a very varied history on this topic. But on the other hand, as Attorney General, she has done some great things. She has. This is a great thing she's done. She's done several others. She formed a Second Amendment task force, right? She's done some rights restoration stuff for nonviolent felons, stuff like that. She's done a good job overall. She is actually, as she tweeted out, one of the most pro-2A attorney generals of all time. Undeniably. The problem is, that's not a very high bar. And she's also done a lot of really bad stuff. For instance, you probably remember now, it's not that long ago, she asked for the membership list of Second Amendment organizations to kind of create a quasi-registry, right? She's fighting against the removal of the NFA $0 stamp, right? Another terrible thing. She's done a number of these incredibly anti-2A actions. And the reality is, this is a great step and it should be applauded, but to a large degree, it's not going to be by our side. And the reason is because of all the other bad things she has done completely unforced. It's a completely unforced error. There's no good reason for her to make these decisions. They are just incompetence. And honestly, she's not that big of a true Second Amendment supporter, right? If I was in charge, things would look very different. If you were in charge, things would look very different. But the reality is, we are lucky to have Pam Bondi in her position. It could be a lot worse, right? Undeniably, it could be a lot worse. The Trump administration has been a very pro-2A administration, as shown by this, as shown by plenty of other actions. But they're not perfect. And I think it's very, very important to address both sides of it. They have done some incredibly bad stuff for the Second Amendment. They've also done some incredibly great stuff for the Second Amendment. I think the only other important point I need to mention first is that a lot of the bad stuff they've done as it relates to the Second Amendment is kind of posing various bits of progress. So they haven't really pushed back on any of our rights, except maybe Trump won with bump stocks, but that's a separate topic. They haven't really pushed back on any of our rights. They've mostly just kind of pushed back on certain rights being restored to us, right? Which is terrible, don't get me wrong, and I'm against that. But it's a little bit different. And on the good side, they've given us back a lot of what we had at the time of the founding. So you kind of have both sides of the coin with them. And I think it's important to address both. But the reality is, this is undeniably phenomenal breaking news. And I hope you did enjoy the video. If you did, by the way, please do subscribe down below. I really hope you did enjoy it. And I'll see you in the next one.